a horrifically boring, very long list and turn it into a presentation that could be done in this format, what I decided to do is just a survey of the islands and show an example of an early cover from each of the islands. But it was and remains something that I'm working on. And there's some sort of a special prize for the first person who can send me a scan of a first flight in or out of Dominica, by the way, which is exceedingly elusive, evidently. But just kind of step through this. So these are the books that I used in addition to Dr. Lockey's original list that I had in my library. Quite honestly, there are probably a couple. Oh, and I also used the American Airmail Society journals that the APS is reselling on behalf of that society. So, it was research that was, kind of limited by what I owned and what was suggested to me. Steve, your book from Jamaica, of course, is fantastic in this area. As these were all are wonderful publications that I've been using for as long as I've owned them, for many topics, not just first flight covers, of course. These, they're not, I don't think they're really that widely collected. I mean, the Airmail Society folks probably collect them as much as the country or region specific society members like ourselves do. I think those of us who collect a country in general probably hang on to them as part of our postal history collection from that country. But there are probably, I'm sure, a handful of people around the world that specialize in collecting the foreign airmail covers by route or something, and therefore there's some real specialization that's been done on this. But in general, what I learned is that the flights in and out of the West Indies, started early in the 20th century. Most of them started in 1929 or 1930. There are a few earlier than that. There are some that started later than that. And of course, Pan Am and the Brazilian Airlines were the two, big pioneers of commercial aviation in and out of most of the islands. I'll admit that when I started doing this, I knew literally nothing about this other than, the handful of Cayman covers that I had accumulated as part of my collection. I actually had to Google what FAM stood for. Okay. I mean, that's how little I knew. And I kind of have gone from there to learn a great deal. The Trinidad airmail book was particularly insightful in terms of a lot of the route information. So I'll just kind of step through these. The vast majority of the covers that are included in this presentation, as in probably all but two, are not covers from my collection. They are covers where I took the images off the internet. So some of you may even be surprised to see a cover that you own show up in this presentation, but if you were gracious enough to scan it and post it on the internet somewhere, I felt quite free to take a copy of it, include it in the presentation. So don't be alarmed if you see something of yours as we step through this. So I have the countries just in alphabetical order. So we'll start in Antigua. They're part of the group that began in 1929. And we'll, at some point as we kind of step through this, we'll hit on Charles Lindbergh and the Lindbergh Circle. Because there's you could do a whole presentation on the Lindbergh Circle and the impact of Charles Lindbergh as an early airmail pilot and the flights in and out of the islands, but which all took place around this same time. So a few of the covers you'll see as we step through here are Lindbergh Circle covers. Antigua, this is one of those countries that I think had a relatively slow start in terms of airmail, but has really stepped up in terms of the number of flights on and off the island in modern times. I had the pleasure of flying there a few times myself. A beautiful place. This cover, as you can see, is from 1929. Pan Am, as typical. Next up, the Bahamas. Yes, question? Okay. The Bahamas, Bermuda, and Trinidad, I think, were probably the most prolific in terms of first flight covers. There are a few other, Jamaica as well, probably falls into that category, where there are literally dozens and dozens and dozens of known covers of flights from all eras, Bahamas being one of them. This one happens to be from really one of the very earliest first flights into any of the islands, being 1919. Interesting in that it's a postal card. I thought was kind of cool. Nassau to Miami, as you can see. Barbados, a lot of Barbados covers. Barbados, to this day, Barbados, of course, is a hub. If you're flying into the smaller islands, there was a comment made on our call the other day about somebody getting to Grenada by way on, it was one of David's covers from the 18th century that went by way of Barbados to get to Grenada. I'm like, well, when I went to Grenada, I went by way of Barbados myself. This one, as you can see, April of 1930. This kind of boxed purple cachet, this is pretty common for a lot of these Pan Am flights. So you'll see something similar from several of the covers. Most of it is, almost all of it is rubber stamp kind of cachets from this era of the early 20th century. The printed cachets and stuff kind of appear in the second half of the 20th century. There are a lot of flights, and there's one example mentioned here. There are a lot of flights that are recorded in one of the catalogs, but there aren't covers known. So it's not clear whether or not if it's known that no covers were carried, or covers were carried and nobody is aware of surviving covers. So if you find, especially from the first 30 years of the 20th century, if you find a cover that has a hand notation of first flight on it, or you may just want to check the date of the CDS stamp relative to the list, it's possible that you could find a rarity hidden amongst what may look like just a normal piece of postal history from the first part of this century. Bermuda. So Bermuda, I decided to include two because this is just really interesting to me. This is a blimp rather than an airplane that went in Los Angeles in February of 1925. The first time they tried, they couldn't land. And what they actually were doing was tethering to a ship, I believe, what they actually did. And but they were not successful on the first attempt. And then they wound up going back in April, and the trip was successful. So the cover on the left is one that was dropped from the blimp, and I guess was meant to be taken by the blimp, but didn't get taken because it didn't stop, actually, to be more accurate. And then the April one is an inbound cover that was in fact dropped or delivered when the blimp landed in Bermuda. There is numerous articles available on the internet talking about this particular experiment in Bermuda with the Los Angeles. If it's something that is interesting to you, it'll be very easy to do some real research on this. British Guiana. So this cover, I think, may be tied to the Dominica discussion later, but we'll talk about that later. British Guiana, because of its strategic location, actually started pretty early with the U.S. Army flying out of there in 1927. This happens to be the 1929 cover from Miami to Trinidad. And it's believed that that this route, there was a version of this route that was flown in 1930 that on the way to British Guiana that stopped in Dominica, but I can't find it. But anyway, so this is into British Guiana. I've found one from we'll talk about when we get to Dominica. I found one from the same set of flights, same dates, but it's not the leg that included Dominica. British Honduras, or Belize City, as a lot of them are postmarked. We're generous in our definition of the British Caribbean and happy to include the mainland countries as well as those that are strictly islands. And they certainly did participate in the early FAM routes. And there was a mainland Route 5 before 6 was developed over the islands. As you can see the mention here, this is part of the Lindbergh Circle flight to Belize City, where Belize City was the third stop. I've got the note. The American Astrophilately site has a wonderful exhibit posted on it just related to the Lindbergh stuff. So I would send you to there if you want to refresh your memory on what that was all about. My friends in the Cayman Islands, this is a cover I wish I owned, I'll tell you that much. So they got a later start. They got permission, as noted here, in 1935 with their friends in Jamaica to have mail carried by air from Jamaica. So it traveled by ship from Cayman to Jamaica and then went onward by air. So that's why this cachet reads first airmail via Jamaica. It didn't actually fly from Cayman to Jamaica. It took a boat and then it flew. The first airmail flights originating in Cayman or being delivered to Cayman, as you can see in the note there, didn't start till 1946, so after the war. Here's my Dominica chart, which if you saw the article in January, this is the format of the broader list that's many, many pages long. Because I couldn't find a cover, I just stuck the 3 flights that I'm aware of. And as I mentioned, I found a cover from this 1930 flight that went between Trinidad and British Guiana. So I know the flight happened. I don't know for sure that it really stopped in Dominica as it's been written. And as anyone who collects Dominica is aware of, it's difficult to do a lot of research on Dominica because all you find is the Dominican Republic stuff. And I remember when I went to Dominica, one of the very first things they told us as we were on some tour was to be sure that we pronounced it Dominica so that they were not to be confused with the Dominican Republic. So they're very sensitive to that. But obviously, if you can come up with an example. I found, in the literature references to the first flights by Liat and Caribbean Airlines, but no indication as to whether or not there were covers really flown on those flights. But I know that's when the service originated by those carriers into the island. Grenada. This from July of 1930, this particular flight. Very limited. Grenada also very few covers around that exist. Evidently, the Pan American Goodwell Flyers, which I have not yet done a whole lot of research on. Somebody on this call probably knows more about them than I do. But in theory, there was mail carried on that very early flight. This one, as you can see, from July of 1930. And like most of the islands, of course, there weren't airports. Right, so they were flying boats that were coming in to the islands and docking and delivering, picking up the mail. Jamaica, I mentioned, very prolific because of their location, population, and commerce. Several airlines flying in and out of Jamaica. There was a kind of a big race in the end of 1930 to originate flights, and literally on the same day, Caribbean Airways, I guess, beat Pan Am by a few hours, according to the literature that I've read. And then there are a couple of stories about it elsewhere. So I believe it to probably be true. And there are a whole bunch of first flights that occurred from Jamaica to many different destinations, both in the US and Central and South America in this same time period. So this is, you could pick just a decade of aerophilately for Jamaica and build an entire collection. Montserrat. So Peter, this I think is the scan that you sent me, so thank you. The early flights into Montserrat, and it's interesting, there are a lot of inter-island later references to even into all the way up to the 1960s of inter-island flights from Montserrat to some of the other smaller islands. So it's very interesting in that a lot of the kind of modern Montserrat stuff is not to the US like it is for so many other countries, it's to the other islands. So, but there's an interesting story here on this particular arrangement. So they were going to have this flight from Antigua to Montserrat and return, but they got it all ready for the return flight in Montserrat, but then the flight didn't happen because due to rough weather. And then later in 1931, a ship that had a seaplane on it called in Montserrat, and based on conversations with the local authorities in Montserrat, they offloaded the airplane and went and sailed on their way. And then the pilot took the mail onto the airplane and flew it to St. Kitts. So it's the mail that was originally slated to go in June of 1930 and looks like it did. If you look at the circular date stamps, they're dated then, but they didn't actually fly until February of 1931. St. Kitts. This is St. Kitts. So this is, I made the note here, it's the smallest country in terms of population in the Americas. And back in the early days, of course, they were just growing sugar. Nowadays, it's a beautiful tourist destination, and if you haven't been, I highly recommend it. Especially Nevis I found to be absolutely spectacular when I was there. But they were added as an extension in 1929 to the FAM Route 6. A spectacular cover. St. Lucia. This is kind of, so this was included in the original Pan Am flights when they went down. They were headed to Puerto Rico originally, but then when they extended it all the way down to Guyana, a lot of the islands get added. So that's why you see a lot of these covers with dates late 1929, early 1930. This is the St. Lucia example. St. Vincent, similar story. This is 1932 from Trinidad to St. Vincent and then onward to Barbados. There is a wonderful picture of the hummingbird. And in fact, I think the picture, if on the introduction to this talk, is actually the picture of the hummingbird. And it was flown by a gentleman from Barbados. Trinidad and Tobago, this may be the longest list of first flights of all of the islands, I think due obviously to its geographic proximity. And they started early in 1929 with the rest, although there were survey and preliminary flights as early as 1920, 21, and 24. But I was not able to locate any covers from those flights, and there was some serious questions as to whether or not any covers were actually flown. I picked this example because of its destination. It's the first flight from Trinidad to the Congo. And the route, so it went from Trinidad, Gambia, Nigeria, and the Congo. This became the airplane ferry service to the Middle East during the war. So 1941, of course, the war is underway, but notice the date on this cover. It's December 7th, 1941, which is the day that will live in infamy, of course, although not because of this cover. So this is a pre-war cover for us, but a during the war cover for our allies, and evidently was an interesting route that became, but if you look at the map at the cache, you can see how it would make sense to come down from Trinidad to the eastern edge of South America and then bounce across to Africa. So I guess it doesn't surprise me geographically that this route exists. Turks and Caicos, also like Cayman, a late starter to the airmail world beginning in 1940. Oh, this, Peter, is also, this is from your exhibit. And wow, I mean, what a spectacular cover. Oh my God. Early flights, 1940 and 41. And British West Indian Airways began service in 1946. So this is an example of one of the covers from 1940. And evidently they flew off of a US Air Force runway, which I found remarkable, but makes sense, I guess, given where they are and what was going on in those times. So, but I just thought the cachet and this cover and the use of the stamps just absolutely beautiful. Virgin Islands. So this one, right? So there's a lot going on in this neighborhood, and I'm sure there are plenty of people on this call who know a whole lot more about this than I do. And when you search for Virgin Islands, there's, of course, there's when they were run by Denmark, when they were run by those that were taken over by the United States, those that were part of Great Britain. So in 1929, St. Thomas was in the process of migrating from the Danish West Indies to the US Virgin Islands. And so this cover was carried off of St. Thomas, but with British Virgin Islands stamps on it. So I'm assuming that it was transited by sea to St. Thomas. And so it's really a first flight from St. Thomas to the US, not really from the British Virgin Islands directly. But I was doing some research on the British Virgin Islands airport, and it really didn't commence operation until sometime in the 1950s. So, like most of the islands back in 1929, any airplanes that are coming in directly are landing on the water, not on the ground. So that's that. You could feel free to unmute. I'd love to get your feedback, and we can bounce back to any island or country that you've got a question about, or a correction, or additional insight. I'd love to hear from you. Can even go here.
John, I have
on you. Yes.
I have some updates for you on the Bahamas. I'll just send them to you. But two of the things that there's a series of flights between 1919 and 1929. Whenever the airmails came into Nassau, that particular Nassau airmail hand stamp went on, and there weren't too many flights between 1923 and 1928. But there's also another experimental flight on October 9th of 1928. It was the week before the same group went out on October 16th.
I am not muted.
Okay, that'd be great, Ed. If you send me an email, I'd sure appreciate it.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to tell you is anything about Trinidad and Tobago airmails, you can probably learn from John Che in Trinidad. He has a marvelous collection of flights.
Okay. I'll make a note to reach out to John and run the list that I have past him.
I think he had all the legs of the flights going to Trinidad and back as well. So
okay.
Good luck.
Yeah. It's interesting. I have started to acquire some of these covers as I've been going through this. I'm not ready to say that I collect them yet, but I've accumulated a few of them so far.
Hey, John?
Yes, Peter, what'd I get wrong?
No, nothing. I was interested to see several of my covers there.
No, we're done.
If you look at my exhibit, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, my exhibit is up on the Sarasota website, the show website.
Okay.
Yeah, it just was in the virtual competition. And
okay.
In that Dominica Postal History exhibit, you will see one of the pages has got 2 first flights from Dominica in 1930, I think it was.
Awesome.
So you can look it up when you want. Right there.
I will. I will be doing that today. I can assure you.
Oh, yeah, they're very nice covers actually. And the other thing is Daryl Fuller is actually a very well-known Australian exhibitor, and he had put out a exhibit was first shown I think a couple of years ago at the airmail show up in Bellefonte that the APS sponsored. And he had a 8-frame exhibit of first flights of the Caribbean, and he had wonderful material, but he had moved in from traditional exhibiting into basically airmail postal history exhibiting, so his treatment didn't quite match the material. But anyway, but he's a very experienced exhibitor. That exhibit has a lot of things that you'd be very interested in, and I think if you can maybe get copies of if it's available or something. Daryl's he's a good guy actually, and he's a very scholarly person and has done a lot of research. But he's got there's incredible number of early first flights from all over the Caribbean, and part of the problem was the exhibit. He took off a bigger bite than he could actually do in 8 frames because he did the whole Caribbean. And it wasn't, so it was a lot. But anyway, and I'll help you track that down. If it's possible, you can get hold of copies of that.
I have Daryl's information, he's seen an early draft of my list, but I will definitely follow up with him, because he was the one who triggered in the first place. So
but you got to pull the copies of the covers out from him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that I haven't seen, that's for sure.
All right.
I spent his 60th birthday with him in Canberra at the stamp show there a couple of years ago. He's moved to Tasmania now, but he had an 8-frame postal stationery collection of the Leeward Islands that I think it won the championship somewhere, so he had to do something else. So he was showing me the earliest of these airmail covers he'd got then. He's one of the good guys, as you say.
Well, like most of us, we all have a favorite island or two, and then we have a favorite aspect of stamps or postal history from that island, but then we all have these kind of tangential side things that we've done. And it's always very interesting as I talk to people, the generosity of everyone to share their information and the material that they have, but having to try to describe something, the person who will benefit the most from the creation of this list will be me, of course, right? Because it's just been a massive learning experience from day one. So any other observations? I feel like we've got the professors of the British West Indies here.
A question for you, John.
Yes,
Steve. You're collecting all these scans of covers. What are you going to do with them? Are you just going to keep them on your little PC, or are you going to publish them on the web?
Well, so that's a great question, Steve, because it is just an accumulation of examples right now as I put this together, right? The list itself is just the narrative description of all of the flights, not with attached illustrations. That could be an interesting wave too, would be to go back and honestly, I think when all is said and done, thousands of covers that will be on the list, how many of them can we actually find an example of, and would it make sense to create a digital archive of as many of them as we possibly could? For now, I've been feeding the illustrations to Everett to use as he sees fit as illustrations to go with the publication of the list in the journal. But I haven't really, they're sitting in one folder on my hard drive on my laptop, Steve, so they're not anywhere. But that's a good idea to think about actually creating a digital archive of some of this stuff.
Okay, well, when you're ready, I'll make a couple of offers. I'm webmaster for the BWIC website, so yep. If they're in a reasonable form, then I'll be happy to put them up there. I'm also look after the Royal Philatelic Society London website as well, so we're sort of building up digital archives of exhibits and things like that. So again, I'd be happy to put them on the Royal website if you wish that to happen at some time.
Yeah, no, that's thank you. I appreciate that, and I'll see what I can put together and put into some sort of reasonable format. It would be nice to have both the list and at least then a link between the list to those where we have examples. And it may well be that I'll just reach out to the broader membership of the British Caribbean group, both British Caribbean groups, and ask for those that you have digitally already, to just simply email them to me. And I'll begin to build up the accumulation until it becomes something useful. I'm sure it will be a substantial effort in its own right, to digitize it.
But one of the things that keeps cropping up, because I'm the focal point for questions on the BWISC on the web, I get lots of questions about airmail rates as well. So do you have that in mind as an extension for what you're doing?
I haven't, but I will tell you that a lot of the books that I mentioned early on as those that I referenced when I was putting this together have wonderful studies of the detailed rates over time for airmail and surface mail. And I think represents a pretty substantial body of work, quite honestly, in a lot of those specialized per country books that I listed. So I think, that would be an extension, but I don't know that I have the resources or the patience, perhaps, to actually take it that far. I could easily see expanding it to include the digital image archives. Getting into the rates, I think I'll probably leave that to the country specialists, because a lot of that work has been done. It's just not specifically defined as airmail. And I will tell you, the airmail catalogs that the Airmail Society has put out are very good, but it's kind of a challenge, because it's all kind of chronological to go through and find the stuff, or you have to go through it by airline, right? They have like a wonderful section on Pan Am or a wonderful section on NYRBA, but then you have to go through by that airline and find the flights that actually went to the islands. So it's, once I got all the easy ones on this list, it's amazing how challenging it is to add to it, right? To find that one item that I'm missing from country X. And it's searching eBay lots, it's searching old online auction catalogs, it's searching through these publications. And early on, I couldn't get them in fast enough. Now it's taking hours to find one to add to the list. So please.
I know the feeling for having done it for Jamaica, and you get so far.
Just Steve, your book obviously was one of the ones I referenced, right? I took my copy, volumes 2 and 3, I think, of your Jamaica work, and page by page went through it, pulling whatever nuggets I could find. So offers.
Sorry, for your information, others' information, I've done all the airmail rates for Jamaica, and I have shared that with a few people, and it will be published at some point, but I've got that available from all the primary sources.
Yeah. So Ed, offers like yours to send me the stuff I'm missing for Bahamas, that's hugely appreciated. So anyone else, as the list comes out, or if you want to see the list now, just ask, I'll send you the whole list. Ray, yes, sir. Oh, I can't hear you, Ray, you're muted. There you go.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, Ray.
Okay, the Turks and Caicos one is very interesting, considering that they didn't build the airport there until 1944. It was built by the 6th CB unit out of New Orleans, and if you get down to the Turks and ask them about it, they'll tell you it's 1946. The interesting part is that there was a U.S. presence there. It was part of the Airways communications out of Puerto Rico. But the real interest was that the British were working there on what became sonar, or the submarine detection, because apparently that part of the ocean is they call it it's deep and it's silent.
Marina called you just a minute ago. You didn't answer the phone.
The chain of sonobuoys that
So you better call her back.
The Atlantic up to the Shetland Islands. It was basically submarine detection, but the U.S. had presence in there much earlier. I have not seen any covers before 1944, but I'm fairly sure that they were there, because we knew that there were German submarines in that area. And in fact, the local people will tell you that they saw German submarines. I ran into a fellow there who was a young boy on a fishing boat, and the German submarine surfaced next to them and asked them for fresh vegetables or something like that, which they didn't have a whole lot of, but the Germans were looking for source apparently fresh vegetables. That 1940 cover must have the only thing I can see on it is they took off from one of the beaches.
Peter, it's your cover. You want to answer Ray's question?
Yeah.
No, you didn't show the other cover, which was very similar, which was
Yeah, I had to just pick one from each island.
Oh my God. But Turks and Caicos is important. You need to show. No, the other one was 1941, and it was somewhat similar. And I don't know how the hell, it was it just, I found it one day, and I don't know the backstory on it, but there was no official government Turks and Caicos sort of national colonial airport. So I am pretty sure the mail actually went out through the U.S. military airstrip, but it got canceled legitimately by the Turks and Caicos post office. So
that's one thing, Peter. That's one thing that is very interesting. Is the cover you have censored by any chance with a 43 on it?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, because
that's another story.
It is, but that because the 43 was used by two different censors, one on Turks Island and the other one over in Providence Collies on the Caicos. But I think what we're talking about with the cancel on it there is probably Turks Island. But it's quite interesting when you go down and ask them at the Turks and Caicos Museum, say, we don't know. And as I say, I was lucky to find.
That's why this is fun.
That's what this is all
But here,
fun.
Pete. So, Pete, this is the other one. Peter, you want to talk about this one for just a second?
Oh Christ! Yeah, that was there's three of those covers, and that was a guy named John Chalice arranged that. He's the one that wrote the Turks and Caicos book that is still the Bible of people that collect Turks and Caicos stamps and postal history. And the description I wrote there really summarizes it better. If people can read that. There were three airmail flights in 42 from the Turks Islands to Jamaica, and then on to Haiti and to US and England. And there was only one cover from each flight that existed, and they were done as a sort of personal thing by, I think it was Chalice's cousin. So, and they don't look like anything, except that the only way you can tell where they went is by the pencil notations and things. But and the Jamaica cachet on it. So
yeah, I'll admit I included the other one just because it was more spectacular from a color.
Well, it's got stamps on it, and we're stamp collectors, right? But the one you just showed is probably a really spectacular, legitimate item. Yeah, there's the two of them.
Yeah, and to say, Ray, this is the page of Peter's exhibit that I lifted the cover image off of that I used in the deck. This is the 1940 and then the 1941 version as well. So, as I've demonstrated here, I'm perfectly happy to steal material from anyone. So, if you want to contribute your expertise and if you have a cover, if you want the list, just ask, right? Send me an email, john.seidl@gmail.com, and I will email you the full list for all the islands. And then when you look at it, if you know that you have covers, and I don't care if they're from last week or 1917, right? I mean, whenever the airplane, if you have one that's not on the list, I'd sure love to hear about it, because I think just for the body of knowledge that we're trying to accumulate here, it would be great. And obviously any information that you've got on most of them that you'll see listed on the list, I literally just have kind of one or two sentences, where the flight originated, where it landed, the date that it took place, the carrier that was involved, and then a narrative description of the cachet and how it reads, if you're aware of it. So with that, any other questions from anybody, or we can declare?
Yeah, I just have another question I wanted to ask you or Simon via you. Simon, do you have some other earlier Dominica first flight covers? The two that I have are.
No, the earliest one I've got is 1932.
Right.
I've got a couple from 32, but I think yours is the earliest one I've seen. Now, you got some very interesting things in there. I've just had a quick look at the exhibit. And you've got the nice size H undenominated postal stationery envelope as well. There's only about 3 of those. There's not many.
Yeah,
I've got a couple, but there's not many.
I know.
Yeah. If you ever find a size K one, that would be.
Yeah. So
theoretically, they were purchased, but I've never seen one used.
So Simon, I'd love to. I mean, as you can see on my list here for Dominica, I don't have 1932, right? I have the 1930 flight, and then I have some modern stuff. But boy, I haven't found anything about the 32 flight. So if you could send that to me, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'll scan a couple of them. It's yeah, and there's a period as well when the mail went via St. Lucia, because and then it switched to Antigua for flying on. But there were a couple of years that it went by boat to St. Lucia and then getting flown out. It didn't. Dominica wasn't often important enough to merit a call.
John, if you look at my exhibit there online, you'll see the two Dominica first flight covers are both from 1930, and they're quite different. So they're interesting.
I will definitely go pull those. So that's great. Thank you. Anybody have any other questions or comments?
Yeah, John?
Yes.
I don't know if Peter realizes that there's an actual trophy for winning Best in Show. I don't know how it shows up on the camera here.
It's a virtual trophy.
No, it's not virtual trophy. It's a heavy piece of glass. And I want to thank Peter for saving the club a lot of money because I don't have to mail it. I can walk down and hand it to him.
Pat and Dan live 7 houses down from me. So 5, sorry.
So we're in walking distance. So
yeah, it's just it looks like don't drop it while you're walking down the road. That would be.
Well, I was really excited to that. I've been working on that exhibit for about a year, as my wife can tell you, and I was really putting it into virtual format. It was very interesting, but I'm very pleased with the result, and Simon again deserves a lot of credit for some of the research and write-ups and things, because I met him at Stamp Show September 1919, and I sequestered the poor guy. He's pretty busy, doing royal stuff, and he's on the board and everything. Sequestered him for 3 hours. And I brought a scan of every single Dominica cover that I owned. And we went through every single one of them. And Simon's very reserved and very British. So he looked at one and he said, he looks at them and he says, "Oh, that's nice." And that for Simon means, boy, that's really fantastic.
So, Peter, not 1919, it was probably 1999. You said 1919 show.
No, 2019. No,
2019. Yeah.
2019.
Okay.
2019. Yeah.
That's 100 years.
Yeah. Well.
But Dan, I've got a couple of your Grenada postal stationery items I'm showing to the Royal in October. I hope should have been last October, but next October I'm hoping it'll be there. So there'll be some Dominica postal stationery in that too, but it's mainly Grenada.
Well,
sorry, John.
Oh no, I was just going to say, the one thing that I think that makes our hobby is as much enjoyable, as any of the academic aspects of it, of course, is the interaction with the other collectors. I mean, everyone I've ever encountered in the British Caribbean group, or quite honestly, any of the other societies that I belong in, is always willing to be giving of their time and their knowledge. And that to me is one of the best parts of the hobby. So thank you all for supporting the British Caribbean group and our field. And obviously, like I said, if you've got any questions or further comments, you can contact me one-on-one. And I think, Liz, we can declare victory a few minutes early on this one, unless anyone has anything else.
Can I just say hello to Dingle Smith, who I see has joined us from Australia. Hello, Dingle, and I will reply to your email.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Dingle. And thank
Dingle.
you.
First of all,
Dingle, thank you as well for helping with my list. So
it's 3 a.m. in the morning here, and I'm wearing a dressing gown, and I woke up rather late, but I enjoyed it very much so far. One query, because I missed quite a lot of the display, how about Hindenburg covers? Are you dealing with those?
You know, I haven't yet, right? I haven't really run into any great examples. So if you, I mean, I do have the airship Los Angeles covers for Bermuda, but other than that, I don't have any other information about airships and I know there were balloon flights into some of the islands and kind of, you know, some that were purely philatelic in nature, some that may have been legitimate experimental flights of various aircraft types. But yeah, Dingle, if you have any information on that, I'd love to see it.
Well, my information is not great and specifically linked to
well,
Jamaica.
If I have none and you have any, you're ahead of me. So
I wondered if the others might like to comment. I mean, obviously there were several flights from Jamaica which have some interesting covers.
Yeah, I think the Jamaica one. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Jamaica wasn't officially on the route, but they stopped there and there were covers created as part of that stop, right? But were they not not officially part of the route, or was that another island that there may exist one from? My memory is not serving me well here.
No, Jamaica wasn't on the route. All the flights were flown into USA and then on the Zeppelin.
Yeah, exactly.
But they did stop in Jamaica, right, Steve? I'm not making that up.
No, it didn't come anywhere near Jamaica. I think it went further south down to Trinidad or that area.
Okay, maybe it's a turn. Yeah, I was gonna say one of the islands I remember seeing like, hey, we weren't really part of the route, but it showed up here, kind of thing. So
there was a stop. It wasn't a stop. They dropped mail on the Zeppelin flight in Cuba. As it was one that went from South America. They dropped mail in Cuba, and then came up over St. Petersburg here, where there's Zeppelin covers that were issued or were created, but they were never flown, and it continued on to Lakehurst.
interesting. So let me see if I've got. Yeah, I just have the Bermuda flights, it looks like, that I'm aware of. So if anyone else, has knowledge of others, that would be great. But anyway, well, thank you everyone for your time. Enjoy the rest of the presentations for the show. Liz, you have any closing comments for us?
No, thank you all for attending. As I said earlier, I'm sorry you can't be here in person, but maybe another year. And hopefully we have been recording this, and my guru, Steve Kennedy, is working on them, and we will be trying to get them back to you.
Excellent. Thanks everyone for your help and your participation.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you,
Bye.
Bye.
Much indeed.